The narrow, winding road was barely more than a scar across the dense, ancient forest. Rain, a constant companion in the Pacific Northwest, hammered against the windshield of my old pickup, blurring the already dim afternoon light. For hours, I'd seen nothing but towering firs and the occasional moss-draped cedar, their branches interlocked overhead, creating a living tunnel. The isolation was exactly what I'd craved, a thick, green wall between me and everything else. Then, the trees receded, pulling back like a curtain on a stage. Blackwood Manor stood before me, a hulking silhouette against the bruised sky. It wasn't just old. It was ancient, its gray stone walls streaked with dark veins of damp, its gabled roofline a jagged crown against the dense cloud cover. Turrets, some crumbling at their caps, pierced the air like broken teeth. Despite the obvious decay, there was a formidable grandeur to it, a sense of having witnessed centuries unfurl. This was it, my great aunt Alara's legacy, now mine, and my escape. A wrought iron gate, rusted into immobility, barred the main drive. I wrestled it open. The screech of metal on stone, a protest that echoed through the silent woods. The sound felt less like a gate opening and more like a wound tearing. The gravel drive crunched under the tires as I approached the massive oak front door. Ivy, thick as a man's arm, snaked across the stone facade, obscuring windows and clinging to gutters, making the whole structure seem as if it were being slowly consumed by the forest itself. A peculiar smell hung in the air. Damp earth, decaying leaves, but also something else, something subtly sweet and cloying, like overripe fruit or neglected blooms. The front door, heavy and dark, yielded with a groan that seemed to reverberate deep within the house's foundations. My breath plumed in the frigid entryway. Shafts of weak, gray light struggled through grimy leaded windows, illuminating motes of dust dancing in the stagnant air. Everything was draped in white sheets, ghostly forms beneath which I could discern the shapes of furniture. Forgotten, waiting. I ran my hand over a banister, the wood smooth beneath the accumulated grime. Alara had lived here alone for decades, a reclusive botanist, they'd told me. Her death had been sudden, mysterious, and then this inheritance had dropped into my lap. A sprawling, isolated manor, hundreds of acres of forest, and whatever secrets Alara had kept hidden amongst her peculiar gardens. My boots echoed on the flagstone floor as I ventured deeper, peeling back a sheet here and there. A library, its shelves crammed with leather-bound volumes, many on botany, their titles hinting at obscure classifications and forgotten lore. I found myself in what must have been the main dining hall. A massive, polished table, long since dulled by dust, stretched across the room, surrounded by high-backed chairs. It was less empty, more expectant. The memory was a sharp shard, reminding me why I was here, seeking this desolate quiet. I shook my head, pushing the image away, forcing myself to focus on the present. This house, this new beginning. Beyond the dining hall, a large conservatory jutted out from the main structure, its glass panes opaque with dirt and age. The air in the conservatory felt heavier, almost humid, even through the glass. A faint, earthy smell, stronger than the one outside, seeped through the cracks around the conservatory door. It was a smell of rich, damp soil, but also something distinctly vegetative. Something that hinted at a life cycle far more vigorous and perhaps more sinister than simple chlorophyll and sunlight. I decided to leave the conservatory for another day. Every creak of the old timbers, every groan from the settling foundation, seemed to resonate with a deliberate slowness, a deep, internal rhythm. I found a serviceable bedroom upstairs, one that seemed less suffocated by dust than the others, and dragged my duffel bag in. As I lay on the old, saggy mattress, the rain had eased to a soft drizzle against the window panes. It was the sound of something growing, something alive, settling in for the night, and perhaps waiting for me to truly wake up. Blackwood Manor wasn't just a house. It felt like a living, breathing entity, and I, its newest inhabitant, was just beginning to understand its peculiar pulse. The last tendrils of twilight had long since dissolved into an inky blackness by the time I finally cut the engine. I stood on the porch for a moment, the heavy oak door a barrier between me and whatever lay inside, the cold, damp air raising gooseflesh on my arms. The interior was a mausoleum of dust and shadows. My flashlight beam cut through the gloom, illuminating shrouded furniture like ghosts. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of damp earth, decaying wood, and something else. Something faintly sweet, almost floral, but with an underlying bitterness that prickled the back of my throat. It wasn't the smell of old roses, it was the smell of old growth. Something beyond the typical decay. I spent the first few hours just trying to find a clear path. Every surface was coated in a fine layer of grit, and cobwebs hung like forgotten tapestries. I managed to clear a small area in what I assumed was the main parlor, dragging a tarp over a threadbare sofa. There was a constant symphony of creaks and groans, the house settling, or perhaps just breathing. I tried to tell myself it was just an old structure, responding to the wind and the rain, but the sounds felt too deliberate, too close. It wasn't a distinct word, more like the rustle of dry leaves, but it was too close for comfort. I spun around, flashlight beam darting into the corners, but there was nothing. My heart gave a little lurch. Just the wind, I told myself, or a trick of the old house. But the air had gone still. The next morning, the rain had eased to a persistent drizzle, casting the manor in a muted, gray light. I'd slept fitfully on the dusty sofa, waking every hour to the unsettling creak of floorboards above me, or the distinct tap-tap-tap that seemed to emanate from within the very walls. It was like being confined to a mess hall during lockdown, every mundane sound amplified, every moment a waiting game for something else to happen, a sense of being perpetually observed, even when utterly alone. The isolation here wasn't peaceful. It was a pressure. After a quick breakfast of instant coffee and stale crackers, I decided to explore more systematically. I needed to find the electrical panel, assess the damage, and generally get a lay of the land. My great-aunt Laura had been a recluse, and the house felt like it had been sealed off from the world for decades. I ventured deeper into the manor, pushing open heavy, protesting doors. Each room held its own tableau of decay. Furniture draped in white sheets like slumbering giants. Forgotten books molding on shelves. A piano with yellowed keys that seemed to hum with silent melodies. They were more frequent now, no longer just a fleeting impression. They were a constant, low murmur, like a crowd just out of earshot, or insects buzzing beneath a floorboard. I'd whirl around, my breath catching, only to find nothing but the same still, dust-mote-filled air. Then I found it. Tucked away at the back of the house, beyond a cramped, forgotten study, was a door unlike the others. With a groan that echoed through the silent house, the door finally yielded, swinging inward to reveal a conservatory. But this was no ordinary greenhouse. It was a cathedral of glass and green, sprawling wider and deeper than I could have imagined. What little light filtered through the grimy panes was immediately swallowed by the riotous, overwhelming plant life. Monstrous ferns unfurled fronds like prehistoric wings. Thick, ropey vines, larger than my arm, snake across the ceiling, their tendrils dangling like silent threats. Strange, fleshy growths, some a deep, bruised purple, others an unsettling pale green, clung to the glass and the brickwork, pulsing faintly as if with a hidden life. They weren't just on the walls, they seemed to be part of them, embedded, merging. The air in here was humid and heavy, thick with the same sweet, bitter scent I'd noticed earlier, but magnified 100-fold. As I stepped further inside, the floor beneath my boots felt strangely soft, almost spongy. The flagstones were not just covered in moss. They were overgrown with a dense, fibrous mat that seemed to be actively spreading, pushing up through the cracks, even coating the lower parts of the walls. It was an organic carpet, pulsing with a faint, internal rhythm that I could feel through the soles of my shoes. This wasn't just Alara's garden. This was something else entirely. The plants weren't just growing. They were consuming. They weren't just the wind. They were coming from the walls, from the very air, a chorus of hushed, hungry sounds, inviting me deeper into their tangled embrace. I felt a profound sense of wrongness, a creeping realization that I wasn't just in an old house, but in the heart of something ancient and alive. Something that had been waiting. The rain had finally tapered off, leaving behind a world slick with moisture and smelling of damp earth. My boots crunched on the gravel path leading from the main house, the sound sharp in the unnatural quiet. I'd spent the last hour trying to make sense of Alara's bizarre will, a document more concerned with the care of her specimens than any tangible assets. But it wasn't the legal jargon that drew me out into the cool, pre-dawn air. It was a faint, almost imperceptible hum, a low thrumming that seemed to emanate from the largest structure attached to the manor, the conservatory. The glass panels of the conservatory glinted dully under the nascent light, stretching out like a colossal, sleeping beast. I pushed open a heavy oak door groaning on rusted hinges and was immediately swallowed by a wall of humid, cloying heat. It was like stepping into a different climate entirely, a tropical lung exhaling a thick, sweet earth scent that quickly turned cloying, almost sickly. This wasn't a neat, curated garden. This was a jungle, untamed and aggressive, bursting with life I couldn't recognize. Enormous, waxy leaves unfurled from unseen stalks, their surfaces slick with condensation. Vines, thick as my forearm, snaked across the high glass ceiling, their tendrils dangling like curious fingers. Some plants pulsed with an almost iridescent glow, a faint internal luminescence that cast shifting, unsettling shadows. Others bore blooms of impossible size and color, their petals unfurling in patterns that defied logic, like intricate, biological fractals. I saw no familiar roses, no predictable ferns. These were alien. A low, guttural drip echoed from somewhere deep within the foliage, followed by a faint, wet slithering. My skin prickled. The sounds weren't those of a peaceful garden. They were the sounds of something alive, something hungry. I moved deeper, my footsteps muffled by a thick carpet of moss and fallen leaves. The air grew heavier, the sweetness of the earth giving way to something sharper, a metallic tang that made the back of my throat ache. My eyes scanned the labyrinthine pathways, barely visible beneath the encroaching greenery. Allure, the recluse, the botanist. What had she been cultivating here? Tucked away beneath a towering plant with leaves like dark, serrated wings, I found a small, almost swallowed up wooden desk. It was covered in a thick layer of green dust, and nestled amongst dried botanical samples and tarnished tools were several leather-bound journals. Their spines were cracked, their pages yellowed. Allure's journals. I picked up the top one. The leather cool and dry against my damp fingers. The script inside was precise, elegant, but as I flipped through the initial entries, I noticed a gradual shift. The early notes were clinical, observations of growth patterns and nutrient intake. But as the pages progressed, the tone grew more frantic, the handwriting less steady. Day 147. The new specimen, designated Helios, shows remarkable adaptability. Its root structure is unlike anything I've ever encountered. A network, truly. I flipped to a later entry. Day 203. The growth accelerates. It has begun to interact with the existing flora, absorbing, transforming. I can feel its presence. A deep, resonant hum, almost a pulse, vibrates through the very ground. It calls to me. My eyes darted around the conservatory. Was that the hum I'd heard earlier? Or was it just my imagination, spurred by Allure's increasingly disturbing words? The air grew thick, humid, pressing in on me. For a split second, the verdant chaos of the conservatory dissolved, replaced by a harsh, fluorescent glare. I was back in that cramped, sterile room, the metallic tang of fear thick in the air, the distant, muffled shouts of the guards echoing down the corridor. A lockdown. My breath hitched. Then, just as quickly, the sickly green glow of the exotic plants returned, the humid air heavy on my skin, the memory receding like a phantom limb ache, leaving me shaken but fully back in the present, though no less terrified. I gripped the journal tighter, knuckles white. This place, it was doing something to me. Or maybe it was just awakening old demons. I forced myself to read on, needing answers. Day 310. The root. It is more than a plant. It is a consciousness, vast and ancient. It requires sustenance, a connection. I have given it what it needs. My blood, my thoughts. We are becoming one. My stomach lurched. My blood, my thoughts. What in God's name had Allure been doing? The metallic tang in the air suddenly made more sense, and I realized it wasn't just the smell of strange foliage. It was the scent of something primal. Something alive. Another entry, scrawled almost illegibly, day 389. The manid is part of the root now. Its veins run through the walls, its tendrils through the foundations. It breathes through the vents. It hungers for a new host. I am fading, but the growth will continue. It will find a new heart. The journal slipped from my fingers, landing with a soft thud on the mossy ground. My gaze swept across the conservatory, no longer seeing just strange plants, but a vast, interconnected network. Its root system, and Allure, my great aunt, had willingly become its heart, its host. The low hum intensified, a deep vibration that resonated not just in my ears, but in my very bones. I felt watched, not by eyes, but by the myriad pores of the plants, by the very walls around me. The manor wasn't just old, it was alive. The journal slipped from my fingers, landing with a soft thud on the mossy ground. The vines on the ceiling, the roots snaking through the floor, the humid air heavy with its peculiar scent. Something earthy, sweet, and faintly metallic, suddenly felt like the breath of a single, colossal organism. It wasn't just Allure's garden. It was her nervous system, and I was standing right in its core. I backed away slowly, my shoes crunching on the fallen leaves and dried tendrils. The sheer scale of it, the quiet, relentless growth, pressed in on me. I needed air, a space where the walls didn't feel like living tissue. My hand brushed against the ornate newel post, and a shiver crawled up my arm. It felt warm, not a natural warmth, but like residual body heat. It was just an old house, my mind playing tricks. The isolation was getting to me. I walked into the library, seeking the comforting scent of old paper. But even here, the air felt thick, heavy with unspoken things. A leather-bound volume, one I'd been meaning to look at, sat on a high shelf. As I watched, it slid, not tumbled, not fell, but slid perhaps half an inch along the polished wood, then stopped. I stared at it, unmoving, for a long minute. Nothing, just the dust motes dancing in the slivers of afternoon light. But then it happened again. I was walking past a tall grandfather clock in the study, its pendulum silent, stopped decades ago. I glanced at its polished glass face, catching my own reflection. For a fraction of a second, my mirrored image didn't move with me. It lingered, a beat too long, its eyes seeming to hold a different, deeper shadow than my own. A flicker of something predatory, something else in the depths of those reflected pupils. I froze, my own eyes wide, staring at the glass. My reflection blinked, then caught up, perfectly mimicking my alarmed expression. The hair on my arms prickled. It wasn't a trick of light. The sense of being watched intensified. It wasn't just the house anymore. It was something within it, something that could see. Every creak of the floorboards above wasn't just the house settling. It was a shift in weight. Panic began to bubble. I needed to call someone. My phone. I pulled it from my pocket. No signal. Of course. This estate was famously remote. I remembered the landline in the study. I rushed back, fumbling with the receiver. No dial tone. I tried another, in the main hall. Same result. The line had worked yesterday, hadn't it? Or had it? My memory was already blurring at the edges. I was trapped. The realization hit me like a physical blow. The house wasn't just strange. It was actively severing my connection to the outside world. It was a cage, slowly closing its bars. The staircase opened into a vast, cavernous room, dimly lit by a single, grimy window high on one wall, letting in a meager shaft of gray light. This must have been it. A huge, blackened hearth dominated one wall, its chimney a gaping maw. It was an involuntary hum, not mechanical, but organic, as if the pipes themselves were veins, carrying something vital through the house. It wasn't empty. It felt full of a presence that was both ancient and nascent, waiting. I felt the gaze here more acutely than anywhere else, a pressure on my skull, pushing down, pressing in. This wasn't just a room. It was a chamber of forced stillness, a place where people had once been gathered, contained, perhaps even controlled. And now, I was the one contained. The lockdown wasn't a memory, but a current reality imposed by the house itself. I was its sole occupant, its captive audience. A faint scratching sound echoed from behind the hearth, a relentless, deliberate scraping. Not a rodent. It sounded like something attempting to claw its way out of the stone. I backed away, my eyes darting around the enormous, suffocating space. The walls here seemed to breathe, the mortar between the bricks a network of hairline cracks that looked less like age and more like tiny, intricate veins. I was alone, truly, utterly alone. And the house, this vast, living entity, had just begun to show me its true nature. It didn't want me to leave. It wanted me to stay. The journal lay splayed, its pages whispering on the damp moss. My gaze, still fixed on the conservatory, had shifted. No longer were these just exotic specimens, beautiful and strange. They were arteries, veins, a living web. Roots, dark and sinuous, didn't just snake through the floor. They were the floor, a living carpet that hummed with a low, resonant frequency I could almost feel in my teeth. Hungry, I backed away slowly, my hand instinctively reaching for the heavy oak door. The sensation of being watched, of being felt by the house, was overwhelming. It wasn't a casual glance from a neighbor, it was the deep, patient observation of a predator. Sleep offered no refuge. That night, the dreams began. They weren't the vague, fleeting wisps of memory I was used to. These were vivid, tactile, intensely real. I was back in the conservatory, but it was overgrown, choked with tendrils that pulsed with a dull, internal light. They wrapped around me, not crushing, but exploring, their surfaces slick and cool against my skin. I wasn't trapped. I was being integrated. The boundaries of my skin seemed to soften, blurring where the vines met my flesh. I saw my own reflection in the dew-kissed leaves. My eyes, wide and terrified, slowly losing their clarity, turning a murky green, like stagnant pond water reflecting the canopy. I woke with a gasp, the sheets tangled around my legs like restraining ropes. The dream lingered, a clinging film over my senses. I could still feel the phantom coolness of the vines, taste the metallic tang of the air. The days that followed were a blur of growing unease. My walks through the estate, once a source of quiet contemplation, became fraught with anxiety. I started to see things, fleeting glimpses in my peripheral vision, a vine swaying when there was no breeze, a patch of moss on a stone wall pulsing with a faint, greenish luminescence before fading. I'd blink, rub my eyes, and it would be gone, leaving me questioning my own perception. The worst of it came late one afternoon. I was exploring the deeper, forgotten sections of the manor, drawn by an inexplicable pull towards a labyrinth of service corridors I hadn't known existed. It was stark, concrete-floored, with high, grimy windows looking out onto nothing but a moss-choked wall. Long, metal tables stood in rows, bolted to the floor, surrounded by fixed, backless stools. Dust motes danced in the sparse light, making the air thick and almost visible. As I stepped further in, a profound sense of desolation washed over me, twisting the room's plain features into something sinister. The tables, once meant for congregation, now felt like barriers. The empty stools were sentinels watching. I saw figures, indistinct and hazy, sitting at the tables, their heads bowed, their shoulders slumped. They weren't moving, just existing, in a state of suspended animation. The air, already thick, seemed to congeal, making it hard to breathe. I felt trapped, sealed in with these spectral, silent figures. The exit door I'd come through now seeming miles away, an impossible distance. A sudden, Sharp pain lands through my temple, and the hallucination shattered. I lean against a rusty support beam, my breath ragged, trying to anchor myself in reality. My eyes, still swimming with the afterimage of the hallucination, dropped to the grimy concrete floor near my feet. There, nestled between two loose floor tiles, was a small, spherical object. It was no bigger than a marble, perfectly round, and pulsed with a soft, internal light. A faint, ethereal green that seemed to absorb the surrounding gloom. It wasn't reflecting light, it was generating it. A bioluminescent spore. I knelt, my hand trembling as I reached for it. As my fingers hovered just above its surface, a strange sensation bloomed in my chest. It wasn't fear, not exactly. It was a profound, undeniable draw, a whisper in the deepest part of my mind, urging me to touch it, to hold it. The spore pulsed rhythmically, a tiny, living heart. My rational mind screamed at me, "Don't touch it. This is what Alara was studying. This is what's infecting the manor." But the compulsion was stronger, a tide rising within me, drowning out the voice of reason. My hand descended, closing around the smooth, cool surface of the spore. As my fingers wrapped around it, the light intensified, bathing my palm in a soft, verdant glow. A warmth spread from my hand, up my arm, and into my chest, a sensation both alien and strangely comforting. It wasn't just a spore, it was a conduit, and I was already connected. And I, with the glowing spore cradled in my hand, was letting it. My gaze, still fixed on the conservatory, had shifted. They were arteries, veins, a living web, and I was caught in it. A chill that had nothing to do with the damp air traced its way up my spine. I didn't linger. I snatched the journal, clutching it tight, and practically stumbled back through the winding paths of the estate, past the choked rose gardens and the skeletal remains of what might have once been a fountain. My mind screamed for solid walls, for a place where the organic sprawl couldn't reach, couldn't breathe down my neck. The nearest structure, an old, utilitarian building used decades ago by the estate's groundskeepers and maintenance crew, had a robust, almost bunker-like feel. A brutal storm had rolled in hours ago, lashing the Pacific Northwest coastline, and the estate manager had called, his voice tight, advising me to stay put, to shelter in place. The room was dark, industrial. Long, scarred metal tables and benches were bolted to the concrete floor. The air was stale, smelling faintly of old coffee and disinfectant, a welcome relief from the humid, earthy perfume of the manor. I flipped past the initial observations, the detailed sketches of new species, the excited prose of a botanist on the cusp of a groundbreaking discovery. Ilara's early entries were sharp, precise, almost clinical. But then, a shift. Gradually, the scientific detachment frayed. A rustle in the leaves that wasn't wind. A vibration through the floorboards when no one was near. I thought it was the house settling, the old timbers groaning, but it was different. A resonance. My eyes scanned the next few pages, her theories spiraling. She described the plants not as individual specimens, but as parts of a single, sprawling organism. She wasn't just observing, he was listening. They communicate, an entry dated several months later declared, underlined multiple times, the letters almost gouging the paper. Not with words, not as we understand them, but through sensation, through vibration. They spoke of hunger, a deep, abiding hunger, rooted in the very soil beneath Blackwood Manor. I swallowed, my throat suddenly parched. Hunger. What did they hunger for? Ilara's entries grew increasingly fragmented, punctuated by drawings that were less scientific illustration and more feverish, abstract representations of twisting roots and gaping orifices within the flora. I tried the usual nutrients. She'd scribbled, almost illegibly, the nitrogen, the phosphorus, the potash. They rejected it. They demand something else, something vital. They desire connection, a deeper integration. She wrote of small offerings initially, of enriching the soil with organic matter, but her language became increasingly vague, hinting at something far more disturbing. The manor breathes, one passage stated, and it requires sustenance. Not water, not light alone. It requires life. To truly thrive, to blossom into its full potential, it must be fed. The words blurred. My hands trembled, the journal threatening to slip from my grasp. Ilara wasn't just cultivating a garden. He was tending a vast, predatory entity. The living web I'd glimpsed in the conservatory wasn't just a network of plants, it was a digestive system, a sensory organ, and the manor itself was its monstrous heart. Her madness wasn't a delusion. It was a horrifying truth he had discovered and embraced. What had she been giving it? The implication hung in the stale air of the mess hall, a silent, sickening question. The last words of Ilara's journal clawed at me, refusing to release their grip. A digestive system, a sensory organ. The paper crinkled under my white-knuckled fingers, the ink blurring into a dark, writhing mass on the page. Everything I dismissed as eccentric horticulture as the bizarre legacy of a reclusive relative now coalesced into a single terrifying truth. Blackwood Manor wasn't just built on something, it was something. And it was hungry. A cold, clammy dread settled in my chest, a weight far heavier than any grief I'd carried before. This wasn't the quiet, personal tragedy I'd tried to outrun. This was raw, ancient, and utterly malevolent. My first instinct was to flee, to burn the journal and run until the Pacific Ocean was a forgotten murmur behind me. But then, a different current pulled me, a morbid curiosity, a desperate need to understand the full scope of the horror I'd stumbled into. Allura's file entries were frantic, almost incoherent, but one passage, scrawled in a shaky hand, stood out like a beacon in the encroaching madness. The root, the heart, below the oldest stone. Listen for the pulse. Oldest stone. That could only mean the original foundation, the bedrock upon which the entire sprawling structure had been built. I knew of a forgotten cellar, tucked away behind the main pantry, rarely used even by the housekeepers. I'd seen its heavy, oak door once, half hidden behind stacks of dusty canning jars. My breath hitched in my throat, a ragged, dry sound. This was a different kind of confinement, one where the walls themselves might be alive. The cellar door, when I finally wrestled it open, groaned in protest, a sound that seemed to echo through the very bones of the house. Beyond it, a narrow, uneven flight of stone steps descended into an absolute, light-devouring blackness. I could hear a faint, rhythmic drip 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 somewhere ahead, a sound that would ordinarily be innocuous, but now grated on my nerves like fingernails on slate. Thin, wiry strands, like desiccated vines, snaked across the stone, disappearing into cracks. Too uniform, too deliberate to be mere plant roots seeking water. The passage narrowed, the ceiling pressing down, forcing me to hunch. The walls began to change. My fingers brushed against it, and I recoiled. The scent intensified, becoming sickly sweet, cloying, like 1,000 decaying blossoms. Then I heard it, a low, persistent thrumming, a deep vibration that resonated not just through the floor but through my own chest. It was a pulse. The passage opened into a vast, cavernous space. My flashlight beam, though powerful, struggled to illuminate the full extent of it. It was an underground chamber of immense scale, far larger than anything I could have imagined existing beneath the manor. And it was alive. Before me, a grotesque tapestry of organic matter sprawled in every direction. Massive, rope-like structures, thick as tree trunks, intertwined and crisscrossed, forming an impossible, tangled network. They weren't roots in any conventional sense. Some pulsed faintly, a slow, rhythmic contraction and expansion that mimicked a colossal circulatory system. It was the sound of a vast, living engine, and it was all around me. The air was heavy, humid, almost suffocating, thick with that cloying, earthy sweet smell that now made my stomach churn. This wasn't just a garden. This was the heart of Blackwood Manor. It wasn't just consuming the estate. It was the estate. The walls I'd walked through, the floors I'd trod, the air I'd breathed. They were all part of this monstrous organism. Allure hadn't just been tending a peculiar collection of plants. He had been a caretaker, a fear, a willing participant in something ancient and terrifying. And now, I was standing in its core, a trespasser in its very being. My breath hitched, caught in my throat. Had it sensed me? Was it aware? I was no longer an observer. I was now part of its internal landscape, a living, breathing morsel in its vast, silent awareness. The air in the forgotten cellar grew heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth, and something else, a sweet, cloying aroma that made my throat tighten. My hand, still numb from the cold, traced the rough-hewn stone of the foundation. This wasn't just cold storage. This was older, deeper. The air itself felt ancient, exhaled by something vast and profoundly patient. I pressed my palm against the rock, feeling a faint, almost imperceptible tremor, a low thrum that resonated not in my hand, but somewhere deep behind my eyes. Then the tremor intensified, becoming a vibration that seemed to shake the very ground beneath my feet. The earthy scent sharpened, tinged with a metallic tang I couldn't place. The rough stone beneath my fingers began to ripple, not physically, but visually, like water disturbed. My vision blurred, the flickering beam of my flashlight stretching and distorting. My head swam, a sudden, dizzying lurch that set me stumbling. The sweet, fumble scent was gone, replaced by the stale, recycled air of an enclosed space, thick with the smell of institutional disinfectant and something vaguely chemical. My eyes struggled to adjust, blinking against the harsh white light. I was no longer in the forgotten cellar. The transformation was absolute, terrifying in its completeness. Metal tables, scarred with countless scratches, stretched in neat rows across a linoleum floor. The walls were painted a sickly pale green, chipped and peeling in places, revealing patches of rust-colored primer beneath. There were no windows, only solid, riveted steel doors at either end, each emblazoned with a stenciled hazard symbol I couldn't quite decipher. A low, constant hum vibrated through the floor, a monotonous drone that burrowed into my skull. "This isn't eel," I muttered, my voice thin and reedy in the cavernous space. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to conjure the image of the cellar, the rough stone, the dripping dampness. Not there, only the persistent, metallic tang and the relentless hum. When I opened my eyes, the mess hall remained unwavering. This wasn't just a vision. It was a prison crafted for my own mind, or something far worse. I started walking, my footsteps echoing unnaturally loud on the hard floor. Each step felt heavy, as if I were wading through unseen resistance. My reflection flickered in the polished surface of a steel table, a pale, gaunt face staring back, eyes wide with a fear that was quickly giving way to something else, a weary resignation. Then, the visions began, not just flashes, but full, vivid replays, superimposed over the mundane reality of the mess hall. My sister, the memory was sharp, painful, but it twisted even as I watched. Her laughter became a choked gasp, her face contorted, not in pain, but in something far more unsettling. Her skin seemed to ripple, the contours of her jawline softening, blurring, then hardening into something fibrous and alien. Not like this, but the image persisted, morphing further. He was becoming part of the house, part of it. It was a violation, a twisted echo of the life I'd lost, now being consumed by the very thing I sought to understand. The humiliation, the powerlessness I'd felt after her death surged back, magnified 100-fold. I remembered the empty rooms, the hushed voices of colleagues, the pity in the detective's eyes. It was all here, in this sterile, echoing mess hall, each memory laced with the sickly sweet scent of decay that now permeated the air. The lie! They felt familiar, comforting, even, in a way that terrified me. The hum of the fluorescent lights seemed to swell, to become a living pulse, a slow, deliberate beat that matched the thrumming I'd felt from the oldest stone. I looked down at my hands. They were trembling, but not just from fear. It wasn't there before. That was. I couldn't be sure anymore. The lines between what was real and what was merely a projection of the mayor's influence were blurring, eroding my certainty with every passing second. The visions of my sister began to intertwine with other grotesque images. The manor's walls breathing, the floorboards sighing, the grotesque, organic growths in the abandoned wings. They weren't just external horrors anymore, they were becoming internal. I saw the tendrils not just on her face, but woven into the fabric of my own memories, pulling at the threads of my past, rewriting them, making them part of its narrative. We have waited. A profound weariness settled over me, heavy and suffocating. My determination, once a fierce flame, flickered precariously. The struggle against the manor, against the root, felt futile, and terrifyingly, a part of me didn't want to struggle anymore. This sense of belonging, this insidious invitation, was a balm to the raw wound of my grief, a promise of inclusion after years of feeling adrift. It was a terrifying comfort, a seduction that promised to end the gnawing loneliness, but at the cost of everything I was. My sanity, my identity, my very self was being slowly, painstakingly eroded, replaced by the deep, resonant pulse of Blackwood Manor calling me home, and I was afraid I was starting to answer. The fluorescent lights, which had seemed to swell, now flickered with a rhythmic precision, mirroring the beat. "Come closer. Let go." The words, not spoken aloud, were a silken whisper in my mind, a seductive promise of peace. And that familiarity, that insidious comfort, coiled like a serpent around my resolve. My stomach churned. This wasn't peace, it was surrender. This wasn't solace, it was absorption. The entity, whatever it was reaching for me, trying to pull me into its suffocating embrace. It had taken Allure. It had twisted the manor into something monstrous. I wouldn't let it take me. A cold, hard determination solidified in my chest, pushing back against the encroaching tendrils of dread. I wouldn't become another root in its sprawling, subterranean garden. The conservatory, that was the heart of it, the main artery. If I could sever that, disrupt its growth, maybe I could stop it. Maybe I could save myself. I spun on my heel, ignoring the seductive whispers, and plunged deeper into the manor's labyrinthine passages. The walls seemed to press in, the ancient wood groaning as if in protest, or perhaps in warning. Each step was a battle. Corridors I remembered as straight now seemed to curve. Doors I knew were there vanished, replaced by solid, unyielding surfaces. The manor itself was fighting me, its very architecture shifting to impede my progress. I pushed through a heavy oak door, expecting the grand hall, but stumbled into an entirely different space. The air here was sterile, sharp, with the tang of disinfectant and stale, reprocessed air. Above, harsh fluorescent tubes hummed, casting a sickly yellow glow over rows of metal tables and benches bolted to the floor. The walls were institutionally gray, scarred with scuff marks and faint, circular stains. A faint, distant thrumming, like an industrial ventilation system, vibrated through the floor. I hadn't been here before. Panic flared, a frantic bird beating against the cage of my ribs. Where was I? How had I gotten here? It's so much easier if you don't struggle. I tried the door I'd come through. It was gone. I ran to the windows, but they were high, Narrow slits, crisscrossed with thick wire mesh, opaque with grime. Through them, I could only make out a uniform, impenetrable gray sky. There were no sounds from outside, no distant chirping of birds, no rustle of wind through the trees. Just the low, mechanical drone and the insistent hum of the lights. This was an illusion. It had to be. The manor was playing tricks, trying to disorient me, to break my will. I closed my eyes, focusing on the rough texture of my jeans, the cold metal of the bench against my fingertips. It's so much easier if you don't struggle. West, you tired. Let me care for you. The voice was gentle, maternal, a lie spun from silk and poison. I opened my eyes. The mess hall remained stubbornly real. The illusion was too complete, too deeply ingrained in my senses. I tapped it. A dull clatter. I could almost hear the scraping of metal trays, the murmur of hushed voices, the clinking of cutlery. It was so convincing, it made my skin crawl. As I reached it, the metal surface shimmered, distorting like heat haze on a summer road. It was the conservatory, or a part of it, trying to break through. The entity didn't want me to reach its hurt. This whole place, this mess hall, was a defensive measure, a psychological prison. With a roar of frustration, I slammed my fist against the shimmering wall. The impact sent a jolt of pain up my arm, but the eluded held. It's inevitable. Where went? I looked around desperately, my gaze falling on one of the heavy metal benches. They were bolted down, but maybe I grabbed the edge of a bench near the wall, straining, grunting with effort. My muscles screamed as I tried to wrench it free. The bolts groaned, digging deeper into the concrete floor. The walls of the mess hall seemed to narrow, the ceiling to lower, pressing down on me. Finally, with a loud metallic shriek, one of the bolts tore loose, scraping a jagged gouge in the floor. I pulled harder, sweat stinging my eyes until the entire bench tilted precariously. I swung it, a desperate, clumsy club, at the shimmering wall where I'd seen the glimpse of the conservatory. The blow landed with a sickening crunch. The illusion shattered, not like glass, but like a fragile membrane. The sterile mess hall dissolved, replaced by the humid, suffocating reality of the conservatory. The air was thick with the cloying sweetness I'd smelled before, now overwhelming, almost nauseating. The dim light filtering through the grime-coated glass roof revealed a chaotic, monstrous growth. But I wasn't free. The moment the illusion broke, the manor struck back. Tendrils, thick and ropey, erupted from the floor and walls, lashing out with shocking speed. One whipped around my ankle, yanking my feet from under me. I fell hard, the heavy metal bench clattering uselessly beside me. Another tendril snaked around my arm, tightening, digging into my flesh. I cried out, struggling against the vise-like grip. More tendrils emerged, a writhing mass, wrapping around my torso, pinning my arms. They felt like roots, living ropes, anchoring me to the damp, earthy floor. You are mine. The pain was a dull ache, then a sharp, burning sensation as the roots tightened further, pressing against my ribs, making it hard to breathe. I thrashed, my desperation fueling a final, futile surge of strength, but the manor held me fast. I was caught, like a fly in a monstrous, verdant web, the ancient house tightening its grip, preparing its new host. My muscles screamed, a raw, burning ache that ran from my shoulders to my fingertips. I grunted, straining against the heavy metal bench. The bolts embedded in the concrete floor groaned, a sound like old bones cracking, but they didn't budge. Not an inch. Sweat stung my eyes, blurring the already dim light filtering through the grime-streaked windows high above. I collapsed, my back hitting the cold, unyielding wall with a dull thud. The impact rattled my teeth, but I barely registered it. Despair, thick and cloying as the damp air, pressed down on me. I was trapped. The heavy, bolted door to the corridor remained sealed, a mocking testament to the manor's growing grip. I pushed myself upright, my gaze sweeping the mess hall. Tables, still sticky with phantom residue, chairs overturned or pushed haphazardly against the walls. A long, stainless steel serving counter gleamed faintly, reflecting nothing but the oppressive gloom. Every surface felt coated in a fine, unsettling film. Not just dust, but something else, something organic. A faint earthy odor like wet soil and decaying leaves permeated everything, a smell I'd come to associate with the manor's deeper secrets. My eyes snagged on a loose panel behind the serving counter, half hidden by a stack of forgotten trays. I ran my hand over the cool steel, finding the seam. A tiny catch, barely visible, gave way with a soft click. The panel swung inward, revealing a cramped, dusty recess. Inside, nestled amongst cobwebs and a few desiccated leaves, was a small, leather-bound ledger. It looked out of place, almost anachronistic, amidst the industrial kitchen equipment. My fingers trembled as I pulled it out. The leather felt dry and brittle, the pages within thick and yellowed. This wasn't just any old book. This was Allura's. I flipped it open, the spine cracking softly. The handwriting was Allura's, elegant yet spidery, filling page after page with botanical classifications, observations on growth patterns, and then something else. My eyes skimmed past familiar plant names, past meticulous drawings of tendrils and roots until I found it. A section titled in bold, stark script, "The Offering." My breath caught. Elara's words, once precise and scientific, devolved into something feverish, ecstatic. The root hungers not for sustenance alone, but for consciousness. A vessel to bridge its world with ours. To truly bloom, it requires a willing conduit, a mind to intertwine with its vast, ancient intelligence. I swallowed, a dry, rasping sound in my throat. Ilara was a willing participant. The ritual is simple, in its terrifying elegance. To open oneself, to shed the skin of individual thought, to become part of the greater whole, to invite the tendrils not into the soil, but into the spirit, to offer the self as seed, as bloom, as fruit. The sacrifice is not death, but transformation. A melding, a surrender. My vision blurred, the words swimming before my eyes. "My dear Blake," the next paragraph began, and my heart lurched. She knew he had known I would come. "Do not mourn my passing. I am not gone. I am merely expanded." The manor called to me, a song only I could truly hear. It calls to you now, doesn't it? It seeks a new gardener, a new host. You are the last of the line, the final offering. The root accepts only those with the Blackwood blood. It is a privilege, my dear, a terrible, beautiful privilege. My hands, clutching the ledger, began to shake uncontrollably. Ilara wasn't just a victim of this sprawling horror. He was its acolyte, its willing conduit. She hadn't just tended the garden, he had become part of it. And now, the manor, the root, whatever this ancient, insidious presence was, demanded the same from me. The air in the mess hall thickened, growing heavy, almost viscous. The faint earthy smell intensified, carrying with it a new, sickly sweet note like rotting orchids. The manor was watching. It was waiting. My mind reeled. Go! Surrender. Become one with this monstrous, living house, or fight. Find a way out, a way to sever this ancient, hungry connection. But how? The doors were sealed. The walls felt alive, pressing in on me, breathing the same foul, humid air. There was no escape. The choice Ilara had made in her madness now lay before me, stark and terrifying. Become the root, or be consumed by it. There was no third option, no path to simply walk away. The mess hall, once a place of mundane utility, had become my final chamber of judgment, and the root, I felt, had already begun to make its demand. My hands, clutching the ledger, began to shake uncontrollably. A cold sweat broke out on my forehead, and now, the manor, the root, whatever it hungered for me. The realization was a bitter frost, chilling me to the bone, yet galvanizing me with a perverse clarity. There was no escape in hiding, no solace in understanding. There was only the confrontation. I wouldn't. A frantic rhythm hammered behind my ribs. I had to move, had to find something. A way out, a way to fight. Anything but waiting for the tendrils to find me. My gaze darted around the study, then to the gaping maw of the hallway. The air here felt thick, viscous, like breathing through a wet cloth. Each breath pulled in the earthy, fungal scent that had become the manor's signature perfume. I knew, with a certainty that settled like lead in my gut, that the true heart of this thing, its central nervous system, lay deeper. Not in the grand halls, but in the forgotten, sealed-off places. Driven by a desperate, illogical instinct, I descended into the manor's lowest levels, past the cellar and the old storage rooms. I pushed open a heavy, rusted door, revealing a space I hadn't seen before. This was it. The mess hall during lockdown. The name echoed in my mind from some fragmented memory of the ledger, a place Ilara had mentioned, a place to be sealed, contained. The room was vast, rectangular, and utterly desolate. Long, splintered wooden tables, once sturdy, now sagged in the middle, their surfaces fuzzy with pale green mold. Benches lay overturned, legs pointing accusingly at the ceiling. The lockdown was evident in the sealed windows, boarded from the outside, and the heavy iron bar that secured the door from within. This was a chamber of containment. But what was it meant to contain or protect? A wave of nausea washed over me. The air was a suffocating blend of decay, rich soil, and something else, a faint, metallic tang, like old blood. I saw them then, the roots. They weren't just creeping along the floor and walls. They were erupting from the very stone, forming grotesque pillars that reached toward the ceiling, where they branched out into a canopy of twisted, woody tendrils. The central mass, however, was in the middle of the room. It seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting with that same slow, internal beat. This was a root, the heart. My throat constricted. This wasn't just a plant. It was an intelligence, a vast, silent consciousness that had woven itself into the very fabric of Blackwood Manor. And it was here, in this forgotten mess hall, that it truly bloomed. Welcome, inheritor. You have sought me. You have found me. The voice was not Ilara's. Not exactly. It was a chorus of voices, ancient and new, layered like geological strata, all coalescing into a single, seductive hum. It spoke of belonging, of peace, of an end to my grief. It promised eternal knowledge, a cessation of pain, if only I would yield. My determination, though frayed, held. No, I rasped the word of pathetic in the vast chamber. The root pulsed faster, and the tendrils on the walls seemed to writhe, elongating. I felt a pressure behind my eyes, a dull ache in my temples, as if something was trying to pry open my skull. I looked around frantically for anything, a tool, a weapon, anything that could inflict damage. My gaze fell on a rusted pickaxe leaning against a collapsed shelf, likely left by an old groundskeeper. It was heavy, encrusted with dried mud, but it was solid. The root hummed louder, the air vibrating around me. The floor beneath my feet felt softer, more yielding, as if the spongy matter was reaching up to absorb me. I could feel faint tremors, like a vast, unseen network awakening. "You won't have me!" I yelled, my voice cracking, but laced with a desperate defiance. I swung the pickaxe, aiming for the central, pulsating mass. I had to fight. The blade bit into the leathery bark with a wet thud. The root recoiled, a shudder running through the entire chamber. But it was too late. As I pulled the pickaxe free, a new sensation bloomed in my hand, a tingling, then a dull ache spreading up my arm. The sap, black and glistening, had seeped into my skin through a small cut on my palm. "You are already mine. You carry a piece of me now. You will always carry a piece of me." Asterisk, my vision blurred. The mess hall, the root, the pickaxe in my hand, they all began to swim. The lines under my skin pulsed in rhythm with the great root. My breath hitched. It wasn't just in my blood. It was in my thoughts, my memories, a silent, insidious tendril already seeking purchase. My legs felt like dead weights. I had tried to sever it, to destroy it, but the root, ancient and enduring, had merely found a new way to flourish. It had entered me, and as I sank to the spongy floor, my body heavy, my mind a swirling vortex of alien thoughts and my own fading identity, I knew Blackwood Manor had won. It would remain, silent and waiting, its horror unbroken, its new inheritor already in place, a living conduit, bound to its ancient, hungry